We are piloting a regional strategy for UN Women, starting with Africa. The strategy looks at 5 thematic areas. It looks at the normative functions of UN Women, which would include CSW and supporting countries for the development of CEDAW reports, and then for those who have not acceded to CEDAW, to support them to accede and ratify CEDAW and then domesticate CEDAW, and the Africa Protocol. It also looks at women's economic empowerment, looking at infrastructure, looking at affirmative procurement. We are looking at big game changers for women's economic empowerment in Africa, particularly with agriculture as an inroad. So we'll be also looking at climate resilient agriculture, climate smart agriculture. Then it looks at ending violence against women. And for us in Africa, we are moving back to violence against women rather than calling it SGBV. Because when you call it SGBV, it kind of removes the focus about violence against women, particularly domestic violence. So we're going to be looking at violence against women, and within the remit of violence against women is where we're going to be looking at ending child marriage, because we see that as the violence against the girl child. We're also going to be looking at trafficking in persons, which amounts to violence, and we're going to be looking at other forms of violence, and then looking at prevention of violence engaging men, and then using the he for she as a platform. We are also looking at women, peace and security and humanitarian action. We have a lot of peace and security issues in Africa. We're looking at conflict because so many countries in our region are rigged with conflict. And then we're looking at emerging issues of combating violent extremism. Now we thought about what can we hold ourselves accountable to as the 3 regions combined. So we're going to be a hub of data. That also makes us a knowledge hub for gender. But what's unique about the Africa Strategy and Gender Statistics is we're working with the Bureau of Statistics across Africa to look at collecting alternative data, because women play at very low levels of local governance, and at those levels the kinds of NGOs that provide support, the National Bureau of Statistics say the data is not reliable. So we are working with the Bureau of Statistics to develop tools and methodologies to make data that comes out of the work that women do reliable, so that they are captured at national level. There are 3 things that plague us. The first being child marriage. Look at the statutory laws in Africa. None of them states that a child is below 18. So all of them have age of consent as 18. However, when you look at customary and religious laws, they are as low as 10, or when a girl sees her first menstrual period. So the understanding and the harmonization of the laws are very critical. So, I mean, we are kind of very optimistic that after 4 years, we're going to see an end to child marriage. There's a lot happening in trafficking in persons that has not seen a gender angle. Our sister agency, IOM, works a lot on trafficking in persons and forced migration, but many of the studies are a bit gender blind. So as UN Women, we want to enter into that space and bring out the gender angle. The third issue that was very pertinent to us as UN Women is the issue of the women's movement, because we recognize that the women's movement was very pertinent and very instrumental to the creation of UN Women. Now, when UN Women was created, over time, the women's movement, or really the women-focused CSOs, thought that UN Women was now competing with them for resources. So we want to now look back at the women's movement, particularly at this point in time where the African Union is completely male-dominated, and we are beginning to see a shrinking of space of CSOs. This is the time where we think the women's movement need to give a voice to women and women's issues. So we want to also reinvigorate the women's movement. So those are the 3 joint initiatives that we thought across Africa we needed to see a galvanization of support, a change of policy in those spaces, and see UN Women having a voice and giving an advantage to collaboration with other UN agencies to tackle these 3 issues. The He for She started as a campaign, and it started as a campaign to increase the visibility of gender inequality across the globe. It started with the executive director, and they had the 10 by 10 by 10. So the 10 by 10 by 10 initiative was to get men to commit to certain things they would do. And I know, for example, that there's a university that Vice Chancellor who was saying that his commitment was to get women into leadership positions in his university, for example. Peter Mutharika's commitment was to see an end to child marriage. And what he has done is he has promulgated a law against child marriage. What we are doing in Africa is saying we want to take the he for she and use the he for she as a programming tool. So it's not just a campaign. So whoever it is that we're going to identify as a he for she is going to commit to doing things to end gender equality, and we're going to track what systems you're putting in place, what programs you're putting in place. It's not just to say, I want to do this, but what programs are aligned to that policy statement to ensure that you are a true he for she. So in Africa, the he for she's have to earn being he for she's. Something else the he for she is doing is addressing masculinities. And many times in Africa, by virtue of our socialization as men and women, we are socialized to believe that the woman is second place. We are socialized to believe that the man is the head of the home. True, but head of the home doesn't mean you have a right to batter a woman. Head of the home doesn't mean you have a right to rape a woman. Therefore, what is making some men see masculinity as a right to discriminate against women, to subjugate women? So we're trying to see that men who agree to feminist principles, we're actually using them to say, how can we turn masculinity positively?